Hi there, Rich Slider here, and welcome to my channel. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about Lolita. I just finished reading Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, and I'm going to try to give a book review. I mean, this novel is, I'm kind of overwhelmed by this novel. So I tried to do an outline of how I was going to approach the book, and I just kind of began listing things at random, topics I want to cover. I think this is way too complex and grand a book to cover in a 20-minute or even a half an hour or even a 60-minute podcast. It really can't be done. It is a absolutely brilliant, astounding, dazzling book. I was overwhelmed by its brilliance. At times I was exasperated by the writing. It was such ornate writing. As far as the plot of this novel goes, well, I mean, I'm not going to really give you the plot. I think everybody knows the plot of Lolita, or else you wouldn't even be here, The only thing I'm going to say about it is this. I'm not going to, I think that everybody knows, or should know at least, that pedophilia is vile, and that it screws up children. I'm certainly horrified and disgusted with it. And again, this book is not, some people would read this book as a polemic about pedophilia. But I don't approach it that way. I think most serious readers do not approach it as some kind of a expose of pedophilia. This is the kind of book that you either accept the fact that it's about a man, Humbert, who is a pedophile, who entices not entices, but who gets sexually involved with a 12-year-old girl for 2 years. You have to either accept that premise and see what the author has to do with it, and you have to accept the style of writing which Nabokov has for this novel, or else just reject it. It's going to be one of those two extremes. Like Sebastian Knight, it is not the kind of a novel that you can just casually read. I mean, I couldn't casually read it. It's just such a complex, ornately written book that you're either going to read it carefully, page by page, or you can't read it at all. Then you might as well, watch one of the two movie versions that were made of it, either the Kubrick version or the, I think, Adrian Lyne version with Jeremy Irons starring as Humbert. I've seen both versions. So I'm just going to sort of list things and run with them, and hopefully it will be coherent. The first thing I want to talk about is the actual character of Humbert, who is so attracted to Lolita. Well, what kind of a person is Humbert? Well, he is, from what I've read of Nabokov is very, very drawn to characters who are obsessive types, artistic types, outsider types, very perverse or twisted types of people, brilliant types of people, people who are extremely literary, extremely sophisticated, extremely cultured, and of course all these things fit Humbert to a T. Humbert, although he's not an artist, a writer like Nabokov would be, he's a literature professor. He's written a book, a textbook, I think, on French poetry. He really is. His perceptions are the perceptions of an artist. There's no question about it. He sees the world in an extremely artistic way. He can take the simplest of things and and magnify it and run with it and explore it in a way that the average person just wouldn't be capable of doing. And by the way, it's very difficult to decide, reading Lolita, whether Humbert is just a character, and that Humbert's style of writing is just something which is tailor-made for Humbert, or whether this is actually the way that whether there's an overlap between Humbert and Nabokov. It seems to me that there is a great overlap. The artistic sensibilities, the aesthetic sensibilities of both of these figures seem to mesh very well to me. It's hard to distinguish them at times. So he's a very, very twisted guy. I mean, and a very brilliant guy. Another thing about Humbert is he's an extremely isolated figure. I mean, Humbert is the quintessential continental European cosmopolitan. He knows all about culture, high culture. He's read everything: French literature, English literature, German literature, Latin. He knows so much. And just the fact that he knows so much immediately separates him from the common man. There's a great abyss between Humbert and the average person, just in terms of his sheer brilliance and his erudition. And now add to that the fact that Humbert is a pedophile, which is really the nail that sort of, seals the coffin for him. If he was isolated just being brilliant, boy, is he really isolated being a pedophile, being somebody who is attracted to what he calls nymphettes, girls. Is a very specific type of girl between the ages, he says, of, I think, 12 and 14, I believe. I could be wrong. I think it's 12 and 14. Just to show you how twisted and how perverse, when I say perverse Humbert is, just going to give you a couple of examples. For one thing, Humbert marries Lolita's mother, Charlotte, who he isn't really attracted to, who he sort of sees as this very, very middle-class cow. He marries her simply to be around the daughter, Lolita. That's a pretty a perverse thing to do, wouldn't you say? What else does he do? He actually, at one point in the novel, has a plan devised to get some barbiturates from a local pharmacy and to drug both the mother, Charlotte, and the daughter, Lolita, to drug them so they're both completely unconscious, cannot be awoken, and while the mother is in one room, dead to the world because of the sleeping pills that he's given her, Lolita is also dead to the world, and he can then molest her. Okay? This is another kind of perversity that becomes very obvious early on. When he enrolls Lolita in the Beardsley School, he's very happy about the idea that while Lolita is in school, his house overlooks a playground, so he can ogle other nymphettes at the same time and get his rocks off that way. So Lolita is not quite enough for him. He needs to have that as well. Here's a very, very good perverse feature of Humbert. At one point in the book, he says, he thinks to himself, well, Lolita is going to grow out of her nymph status shortly. When she gets to be 14 or 15, she'll lose that desirable nymph quality that I'm so sexually attracted to. And then this is the kind of guy that will actually consider marrying Lolita, his stepdaughter, and he's thinking about having of Lolita having his child. So now there will be a Lolita number 2, so that when she grows up, he's already calculated this in his mind. the Lolita number 2 will be at nymph age, between 12 and 14 or whatever it is, when he is still virile enough to enjoy having sexual relations with her. So the guy is, in this sense, a perverse monster. He all throughout the novel, he acknowledges it. He's not proud of the fact that he's obsessed in this particular way. But I'm just mentioning these examples just to show you what I mean when I says that he is a perverse sort of character, a very twisted, dark sort of character. Another thing that this perverse character Humbert does is he's very, very contemptuous of head shrinkers, of shrinks, of psychiatrists. At one point, Humbert has a nervous breakdown, and he commits himself to a sanatorium, I think in Canada. And while he is there, he amuses himself by making up dreams that he thinks the psychiatrists would get excited by. These are the kinds of things that he thinks psychiatrists are looking for. It's what they live for, these kinds of dreams. And he's always making dreams up and telling them stories about himself. He's much too bright to not know how these psychiatrists are going to respond. And he never really wants any treatment. He's too contemptuous of them. This is the kind of alienated, twisted character that Humbert is. And it's very funny, too, because he tells us he's acknowledging this as he's writing about it. Now, ordinarily, I would not call a writer a snob or an elitist. I mean, all writers... in my opinion, serious writers are somewhat removed from the mainstream of society. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to write about the things they write about. They have to be removed from the mainstream. So I'm hesitant to call a character or a writer a snob or an elitist. However, I will make an exception in this case. Humbert is the biggest snob, the biggest elitist that you can possibly imagine. And I suspect from what I've read of Nabokov, he too is an extreme elitist and an extreme snob, with great justification, by the way, because he is so brilliant. I guess one of the things that strikes me about Humbert and Nabokov, when I say Humbert, I'm going to include Nabokov from now on, because they are so indistinguishable to me at times. Humbert is extremely contemptuous of Philistinism, of boorish, middle-class, bourgeois people. This is woven into the fabric of every line of the story, the tone he adopts. He really can't stand the heartland of America, so to speak. I mean, Humbert is the quintessential sophisticate, and he's around what he considers to be yokels, basically. And this is a very, very heavy subtext of Lolita. Another endearing quality about Humbert is that he is totally self-absorbed. Humbert is not concerned about helping society. He's not concerned about the issues of society or the external world. He's completely absorbed in himself and in his sexual obsessions, which revolve exclusively around Lolita. And of course, all this is told, this character, you have to see in this novel the amazing amount of humor that is infused into the book, too. I mean, Humbert is very self-deprecatory all of the time. And you're either going to appreciate that or you're not. It's going to leave you cold. Another thing to remember about this story is, in a way, for me anyway. It's kind of a doomed love story from the start. That things can't work out between Humbert and Lolita. For one thing, Humbert has basically, by molesting Lolita and then going on this long odyssey across the country with her, he's really robbing Lolita of her childhood, and he knows that too, and he hates himself for it, but he can't help himself. And because and Lolita in turn is very, very, she does not like Humbert, her guardian, her stepfather. She doesn't like him. She hates him for having done this to her. She knows that he has done this to her, and she hates him for it. And Humbert knows that she hates him for it. But at the same time that Humbert knows that she hates him for it, and at the same time that he knows that he's a monster for taking advantage of her, as we find out later on in the book, he really does love her too, quite apart from the sexual aspect of it. And therein lies the tragedy. He does love her, and yet it is just doomed. It can never work. It can never work. He's alienated Lolita, the one that he loves, aside from the fact that she's a minor. It can't work. You know it's going to end badly. Now, in spite of the fact that Humbert is, he's a freak. He is, and he acknowledges that, in spite of the fact that he hates himself for being a kind of a sexual monster, I suppose. At the same time, this is a very, very, these characters, or the character of Humbert and Lolita, are not cardboard characters, where Nabokov is trying to say, Humbert, bad. Lolita, victim. I mean, it's not that kind of a novel where Nabokov is getting up in a soapbox and trying to decry the immorality of taking advantage of a minor. It's not a soapbox kind of novel, if you haven't noticed it. It's a work of art. It's a great, great work of art. Like I say, you either accept this as the premise, the pedophilia aspect of it, or you don't. If you don't accept it, then you really can't read this book. So it's a much more complex novel than that. Like I say, Nabokov and Humbert both appreciate the fact that Lolita is herself a very seductive girl. Girls at that age, prepubescent and pubescent girls just reaching puberty, can be very, very seductive. They can have crushes on older men. They can be very flirtatious. This is not lost on Humbert. I mean, as a matter of fact, as we find out, I'm sorry that this review has a lot of spoilers in it, but we find out that Humbert says that when they have their first actual sexual encounter, where they have sexual intercourse, Humbert actually says that Lolita seduced him. And that's quite accurate, as we find out by reading this book in the history of Lolita. Lolita is not a virgin when Humbert and she have sex. What we find out is that Lolita had sex with a boy at a summer camp that she went to. So she was not a virgin. Plus, she is very, very flirtatious. And she did kind of seduce him the first time. However, at the same time, we have to remember that, and Humbert realizes this, that this does not mean that she took advantage of him. He's not that deluded. Yes, girls go through this phase, but a normal, adult, mature, responsible person would not have sex with a prepubescent or pubescent girl who was flirting with him. You just wouldn't do it. You would be able to handle it maturely. He can't, because he is suffering from pedophilia, and he acknowledges it too. He doesn't try to, as many pedophiles do, I understand, they try to make it seem as if it's all on the youngster, which is all bullshit, of course. So he knows that, and Nabokov knows that. But I'm just saying that there is that element in this book of where you have to acknowledge that Lolita is going through this particular phase as well. She does sometimes encourage Humbert. She says at one point to him, you raped me. But she says it not in a shrill or accusatory way. She says it in almost a playful way throughout this. So there is that aspect to it. It's a very multi-dimensional kind of character that Nabokov is writing about. But of course, as we do find out, I mean, she really has been robbed of her childhood, and she knows it, and she is miserable with him. As I said, I don't want to belabor the point. Now let's go on to the pornographic aspect. I mean, the whole reason that this book became famous, it became such an outrage, or it came onto the literary scene with meteoric speed, and it came on it because of the sexual nature of the subject matter. Now, I did not find this novel at all pornographic, at all prurient, at all titillating. If you want to get your rocks off or be sexually stimulated, you would do well to pick up a copy of a high gloss magazine in the vein of Playboy or Hustler or Penthouse or any number of others, and look at all of the high gloss airbrush pictures in them and at the centerfold, if that's what you're into. You're not going to get it from this. I certainly did not feel in the least bit. You cannot. This is a work of art. It's a work of literature. The pornography. There is one, for instance. There's one scene early on, before Humbert and Lolita actually do have sexual intercourse. There's one scene where Humbert is in his bathrobe, sitting on one edge of a sofa, and Lolita is sitting on the far end, the other end of the sofa. And the scene involves Lolita putting her legs on Humbert. He's kind of a handsome fellow, and she is flirtatious, and she likes him. She likes his personality before they start actually having the kind of soul-crushing sex that they do throughout the bulk of the novel. So her legs are resting on his lap. And what happens is, Humbert, being the dyed-in-the-wool, hopeless pedophile that he is, the nymphette lover that he is, he has an erection. He gets aroused. And he actually is able to manipulate his erection in such a way that he actually, under his bathrobe, he actually has an orgasm while she's just, reading a magazine or something with her legs on him. And Lolita doesn't even know that Humbert has achieved orgasm. Now, this is not at all prurient or pornographic. Nabokov writes about this in such an ornate, literary way, in such a circumambulatory way, that I would find it unbelievable that anyone would get sexually stimulated by this. This is an extremely masterful passage in the novel. It's extremely funny, that's for darn sure. The humor of it is not lost on me, as I'm sure it wouldn't be on many readers. But pornographic, not at all. I don't think so. I kind of feel about this novel the same way that I would feel about Death in Venice, the novella. Both of them kind of deal with the same subject. In the Death in Venice, you have this musician, this composer, Gustav von Aschenbach, and he goes to Venice for a vacation. And while he's there vacationing on the Lido, he sees a boy of about 11, 12, something like that, and he becomes infatuated with him, sexually infatuated with him, as well as infatuated with him on an aesthetic level. But there's no physical contact whatsoever. Mann goes to great pains to make sure that we realize that there's never any sexual contact. This is all in all the thoughts that are generated by Gustav von Aschenbach, all of his philosophical and all of his artistic speculations about the nature of art and so on, never culminate in any sexual overtures to Tadzio the boy. So it's not the kind of a novel that, again, you're sexually stimulated by. It's a novella. It's just much shorter. Now, again, I did not feel at all that this is a prurient novel, Lolita. However, there is one big difference. And the difference is that in Lolita, there is sexual contact between Humbert and between Lolita. Lots of it, okay? This is very, very clear throughout the whole novel. So that is a major, major difference. Although, as I said, repeating myself, but in both cases, to me, to my way of thinking, there is absolutely nothing prurient about this. The style, the literary style of this novel is such, it is so ornate, so baroque, that pornography is the last thing I think about when I'm reading this novel. When you are reading this novel, the sentences, generally speaking, are extremely long. You tend, just like in my review of the real life of Sebastian Knight, sometimes the sentences are so long and ornate that you have to read the sentence several times to remember what the latter part of the sentence was referring to in the beginning of the sentence. It's that ornate with many, many clauses and many, many details. It's laden, each sentence is laden with so many details. Sometimes the details can become exasperating. It becomes too much for me. Maybe if I read it again, it wouldn't be quite as exasperating, but sometimes, I'm not going to say he goes overboard. I can't judge Nabokov on a first reading like that, but these sentences are just packed solid, which is the chief reason why I can't see this as being at all pornographic. There are references, and again, Nabokov seems to know everything. Nabokov seems to have a mind like a steel trap. He doesn't miss a trick. He has got to be the most cultured, urbane, sophisticated, erudite, scholarly writer that I've ever come across. Maybe Herman Melville, maybe he can rival this. But he makes references. Let me see. He makes references. And we're talking about Humbert. Humbert is such a literary figure. He makes references to Ovid, to Latin, to French, to English literature, to he's constantly, Humbert was educated primarily in France. And so he's constantly interjecting these sentences with expressions, French expressions. It really would help a lot if you know a little French. I'm fortunate. I don't speak French, but I did study French in high school, and it stayed with me. And I'd say about 85 to 90% of the French idioms and expressions that Humbert uses in the writing of Lolita, I got. Okay. I didn't get the Latin ones. The reference to Ovid, I had to look up. I had to look up so much stuff. You have to know about Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is also a very much admired writer of Nabokov. And I didn't know this, but Edgar Allan Poe, when he was, I guess, in his late 20s or 30s, he married his 13-year-old cousin, Virginia. This is a big theme in Poe, as it is, and as a matter of fact, Edgar Allan Poe has this very famous poem, Annabel Lee, which is about the love between two young people, and Annabel Lee, the girl, dies, and it's about how the male figure's love for her will not die. It's immortal. It's a very haunting, very simple, repetitive, and yet very haunting, almost heartbreaking poem to read. And this sentiment is shot through the fabric of Lolita. The spirit of Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe is shot through this entire novel. As a matter of fact, before Humbert actually hooks up with Lolita, he talks in the beginning of the novel about his first love, his first childhood love, when he was about, I guess, 11 or something like that. He met a girl, and the girl's name was Annabelle or Annabella. I think it was Annabelle. And they were just on the cusp. They both loved each other passionately, although their love never reached sexual fruition. And Annabelle in Lolita, Annabelle dies when Humbert is very young, and there's speculation that maybe his obsession with Lolita is his attempt to try to recapture his lost love, his first love, Annabelle. And again, this goes right back to Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. So it would behoove the reader to know about this also. There were references to Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, of Dante, and Beatrice. Dante first fell in love with Beatrice when Beatrice was, I think, 12 or 13 years old. There's a reference to a Petrarch, the Renaissance poet, who fell in love with Laura, who he writes sonnets to, when she was about 12 or 13. There is a reference to Botticelli, to Proust. At one point, Humbert says in a very, very witty way, he says that one of his girlfriends is so dumb that it makes his first wife Schlegel, and it makes his second wife have the intelligence of a Hegel. So compared to his girlfriend, his first wife had the brains of a Schlegel, and his second wife had the brains of a Hegel. This is what he says. It's very witty, but obviously he's at home with everything. Humbert. He's at home with philosophy, with art, with literature, with music, with culture. He speaks many languages. He knows about just about everything, this guy. It's about, this is a character who is just brilliant. He's an extremely cultured character, and it behooves the reader to be, you can't be equally cultured. I don't think anyone can be as brilliant and as cultured as Nabokov and H.H., but it will behoove the reader to know a lot of the references that are being made in this book in order to appreciate it fully, or to do a significant amount of research. You have to do a lot of research to read this book, to get all of these witty comments and these asides and these self-deprecatory comments that Humbert makes. I mean, reading this novel is not like reading Catcher in the Rye. It's not that kind of a novel. It requires a great deal on the part of the reader, which again goes to the point of how I just, for the life of me, cannot see anyone reading this for any prurient interest at all. Now, here's something else which is very, very interesting. Humbert, in the middle of the novel, after he begins his relationship with his sexual, Humbert is the stepdaughter of Lolita. Lolita's mother, who Humbert had married, dies. She's killed accidentally, car accident. And so now Humbert Humbert is not only the stepfather of Lolita, but he's having a sexual relationship with her. And Lolita really doesn't have anybody else, any other relations. So she's kind of like dependent upon him. The second part of the novel, after Lolita's mother dies, and it's just the two of them now, they embark on a series of road trips across the country, back and forth, thousands and thousands of miles. And they're always staying at motels and hotels and eating out at diners and so on. And the second part of the novel is it's very, very much involved with Humbert Humbert's observations about American culture and about Americana. This is a very, very integral part of the novel. It's one of the subtexts of the novel. Culture in America, Philistinism, boorishness in America. I read Humboldt's Gift, not to be confused with the character Humbert Humbert. I read Humboldt's Gift by Saul Bellow, and I loved it. And Humboldt's Gift is also infused with observations about American culture and Americana. Bellow, like Nabokov, knows a lot of stuff about everything. He knows about philosophy, economics, politics, particularly, geopolitics, not only U.S. politics, but world politics. He knows about literature. He knows about clothes and fashion. The main character in Humboldt's Gift is always talking about the clothes that people wear. He knows the names of different dresses and cloaks and garments. He's full of memorabilia. He's full of facts. He knows everything. So I thought, I'm never going to read another novel that's so steeped in American culture as Humboldt's Gift. But I was wrong about that. As good as Saul Bellow is in Humboldt's Gift, Vladimir Nabokov in Lolita goes way beyond it. He blows Bellow out of the water with his observations about culture, about during these road trips. I mean, he has so many descriptions of hotels and motels. And, Nabokov and Humbert Humbert seem to know everything there is to know about fabrics and garments as well, about knickknacks, about American history, you name it. It's just incredible. I mean, the way that Humbert Humbert talks about American culture is almost like the way that Melville talks about whaling in Moby Dick. It's that intermingled in the fabric of the story. And the funny thing about it is, you have to remember, Humbert Humbert, who's telling his tragic tale about Lolita, Humbert Humbert is not even an American. Humbert Humbert is the quintessential urbane, sophisticated, European cosmopolitan literary figure. He comes to America, and yet he's an expert on Americana. I mean, Nabokov has invented an America, a mythological America, just for his character Humbert Humbert. It is quite astounding what he does there. Now, there is one more book that comes to mind that is also very much steeped in the culture of the United States, the sentiment of American culture. And that book would be The Great Gatsby, which I read within the last year. Great Gatsby is about the Jazz Age, the 20s, post-World War I. It's a very, very big part of the book. And yet, The Great Gatsby is a very different type of book than Lolita is. Even though it has American culture is infused into it, it's not on the same level that Lolita is. I mean, you could understand why The Great Gatsby would be such a popular book. I don't quite understand why Lolita would be such a popular book. I mean, it's just the kind of a book that only people who are very, very comfortable with literature and high culture would be able to read. So I'm puzzled as to why it would even have attained the popularity that it has. I mean, it goes far, far beyond Humboldt's Gift. It goes far, far beyond The Great Gatsby in its complexity. I mean, the observations that Humboldt makes about just about everything are so witty, sophisticated, urbane, complex. His relationship is so complex. It's just a different kind of novel. It's really kind of an overwhelming novel. Also, Humbert knows all about stereotypes. You know, the world is run on stereotypes. The movies we watch, the Hollywood movies, they're all run on the stereotypical notions. Most of the books we read revolve around stereotypes. Mass media revolves, our perception of the world revolves around everything revolves around stereotypes. And Humbert understands this. And certainly Nabokov does. At one point in the book, Humbert talks about the 3 different types of movies that Lolita seems to love to go to. And he dissects with pitiless, ruthless precision the stereotype of the Western cowboy movie, the stereotype of the cops and robbers movie, the stereotype of the musical. These are the 3 types of movies that Lolita likes. So again, to do this, he has to be completely steeped in the Philistine-like American culture that he now finds himself in. So you're really getting a running commentary on America in the 50s, at least. You're also getting, I've said this before, but you learn when you read this book, you're learning about literature, culture, clothing, fashion, suburbia, motels, hotels. There are so many hotels and motels in this novel. So there's one more thing also. I said that the style of this novel is extremely ornate. Well, to add to the complexity, Humbert uses the most arcane, obscure vocabulary. I found myself looking up sometimes five or six words in one page, just to find out what the hell they meant. He has this all throughout the novel. We're talking about, I would hazard to guess, I don't know, maybe 200, maybe more, a completely arcane vocabulary words that he uses. It's interspersed throughout the fabric of the story also. So I found this, when the writing wasn't just completely brilliant, it was either brilliant or it was so brilliant that it became exasperating to me. It was one of those two. Now, of course, with this book, Lolita, there was a lot more of a plot than there was in the real life of Sebastian Knight. There was a lot less of a plot there. This one definitely does have a pretty spectacular plot. You can't deny it. The stepfather of a nymphette who has sexual relations with her and travels all over the country with her, making observations about culture and literature and every other thing under the sun. And of course, there is a villain in this novel, Claire Quilty, the playwright. And of course, as monstrous a figure that Humbert is, he is at the same time remorseful. He hates himself for taking advantage of Lolita. And when you compare him to Quilty, Quilty is just complete depraved slime. Humbert actually doesn't come out so bad, you know. You do feel a great deal of sympathy at the same time for Humbert. At least I did. I don't think any truly serious reader of Lolita can say that the character of Humbert is not without a great deal of sympathy and humor as well. We have to remember that too. So in conclusion, all I can say about this book is that it is an overwhelmingly ornate book to read. It's kind of like reading Moby Dick. It's got that kind of ornateness to it. It's overwhelming. It's brilliant. It's got to be the most brilliantly written book that I've ever read. Nabokov has got to be the most brilliant writer so far that I've ever read. It's just that simple. Not all of the reading of it was enjoyable. It was quite a challenge, but so far anyway, my current feeling is that Nabokov is just hands down the most brilliant writer I've come across. I thought that Saul Bellow was pretty high up there, and he is, but Nabokov is just, I've never come across someone like him before. Now, of course, bear in mind, I could do this book review 5 times, and every time I do the book review, I would probably do it a different way. This novel, Lolita, I don't even know if I would call it a novel. It's such a strange, peculiar book. It's kind of a metafiction in the sense that Humbert, who's writing this history of his relationship with Lolita, is always aware of the fact that he's writing, and he's always very self-conscious about his writing style and making comments about his own writing in it. He's always looking at himself as he's doing it. I just wouldn't call this, to say that this is a novel is really not doing enough justice to this book. I mean, there is actually a website, as I was doing all my research on Lolita, there's a website, I think it's called the Nabokovian website or something, and people write scholarly papers on this book. I mean, there are so many obscure and arcane references in this book. Like I said, Nabokov knows everything. He's just a bottomless fountain of information, of trivia, of culture, and so people write scholarly papers on this all the time. I mean, if you want to write a graduate thesis on Lolita, be my guest. There's certainly enough material to write about. So in this sense, it's a joke to try to do a book review of this thing. It really is. I did the best I could. But is it worth reading? It's worth reading for a very particular type of person, but only for that type of person. If you're not somebody who's able to be exasperated at times and to do the legwork to understand a lot of the allusions in Lolita, don't read it. Just watch the movies, which are also great, but they're still not the book. Thank you very much.